Happy Earth Day! We actually have a real one, not a National Jelly Bean Day or something, which actually I think it also is today. But Happy Earth Day, we've got a real sort of thing. It's also the first day of Passover to our Jewish friends and listeners, which I can't imagine we have many of, but, you know, if we do, Happy Passover. So that just reminded me of a joke that I don't know I should tell. Given all the... I'm gonna screw it. I've already went down that road anyway. Alright, so I'm watching. The kids are starting to get into wrestling, which I'm a little torn about. I haven't watched wrestling in 20 years, but when I was a kid, I was super duper into it for my entire childhood, all the way up until I was a teenager. And so we've been watching a lot of the old stuff because it's on Peacock. I think I talked about this on another episode. Anyway, so I'm watching, and there were so many examples. We've been watching some old episodes of like Monday Night Raw, and there's so many examples of things being said and done that are just so not okay. I mean, and it's crazy just to think about. Oh, good God, look at these idiots. Just almost had a wreck in front of me. It's crazy to think about just how misogynistic and racist society used to be. I mean, because, you know, I'm 37 now, right? So I'm at the age to where I am definitely old enough to say, you know, back in my day and remember when things really were different than how they used to be, you know, for most of my life up until the last 10 years or so. Excuse me, really the last 5 years maybe. You know, I didn't feel like I was old enough. I felt like, you know, I'm still young and things have been this way. You know, it's pretty much society has made little shifts and changes, but not that much has changed throughout my life. But now I'm old enough to where I remember when shit used to be different. And, you know, it's crazy to hear some of the, you know, especially on wrestling, some of the just blatant, overt misogyny and racism, and it's nuts. But yeah, anyway, so one little, I don't know why this is so funny to me. I just never heard it before. And it just, one example of this is I'm watching it. And so I'm also, I'll get to it in a minute, but I'm also watching this with the kids a lot. So I'm having to tell them like every few minutes, it feels like, okay, this is not something we actually want to copy or do or be like. You know, like we're watching the old DX stuff, and obviously they do a lot of things that, you know, I tell the kids, you know, it's not really okay to do that. You don't need to say that or do that. So anyway, maybe we shouldn't be watching it. But, yeah, I'm probably going to have to rethink all of that. But anyway, so I'm watching it, and there's Jerry Lawler, Jerry the King Lawler. For those of you who aren't wrestling fans, he was one of the main announcers for years and years with JR Jim Ross on WWF. And his son, actually, which they hadn't actually officially announced that it was his son, but they were making subtle jokes about it. His son, Brian Christopher, is what he went by. His name's Brian Christopher Lawler, but his wrestling name was Brian Christopher. He's wrestling in one of his early matches. And he's wrestling this, I think he was an Asian wrestler. And, you know, so the Asian wrestler's doing a lot of, you know, high-flying martial artsy type stuff. And Jerry Lawler says, at one point he's talking about Brian Christopher, and he's saying, he don't know anything about martial arts. He don't know karate. He thinks judo is what they make bagels out of. And I just bust out laughing. And then I have to find a way to not explain to the kids why that's funny. And I had to tell somebody it too, and I texted my cousin and told him, but oh God, I don't know why that's even so funny to me. He thinks judo is what they make the bagels out of. Anyway, so happy Passover. I guess I'm in a good mood today. Maybe I need to start thinking of a racist joke every morning to put myself in a good mood. That's terrible. But anyway, you know, on that note, it's weird. I've been reading a lot, and well, we've all been seeing a lot about, the stuff that's going on with Israel and Palestine right now. And I'll be honest, I don't know much about it. I only know like the headline stuff. I don't even know all that much about the history, which I probably know more than a lot of people, but I still don't, I would not at all by any means consider myself well informed or educated on all that. But I have been surprised by the big rise in pro-Palestinian sentiment in the country, especially with young people, especially with the progressive end of society, which I normally in most things identify with, not all things, but certainly in economics and some other things I tend to think of myself as that. But I've been surprised by that, and it's even in a lot of instances, even verged on and maybe crossed into anti-Semitism. And it's a very strange thing now to think that, the progressive wing of society that is, it's for the last decade or more become so, to the point that it's comical, so afraid of offending anyone and being overtly inclusive and just over the top, about diversity and now that a lot of these people are starting to push the sentiment that is verging on racism and moving into racism and anti-Semitism. It's weird. I don't know. Plus you got to think about where is this news coming from, and that's a big, big thing nowadays. Your information and the truth is entirely based on who you choose to believe. That's the way the world is now. There is no journalistic integrity anymore. There is no trusting the media anymore. If you watch Fox News, you are going to have a completely different set of ideas about what's happening in the world than someone who watches CNN. That's just the way it is. And that's sad. That sucks. But, things are presented in such a way that, it's going to be skewed, and some things are going to be talked about on one channel, but they won't be talked about on another. Anyway, I'm getting way off topic here. So I try to take that into account, but it's a lot of these mainstream CNN and NBC and Reuters and stuff that I've been reading about this stuff in, and I tend to believe most of what is printed in these kind of sources. The New York Times was another one. Talking about all this stuff that's happening, in universities with the protests, and it's a weird thing, because you definitely want to protect people's rights to protest, and I hate the idea that I know there are now Republican lawmakers who are pushing to push out these Ivy League school presidents because they're allowing protests. I mean, that's part of America. That's part of college. That's part of, but apparently some of these protests really are crossing the line into anti-Semitism. And now I wonder, who are they, where are these protests happening? Because if they're protesting just like in the quad or whatever at the university, that's one thing. But if they're actually protesting, near a Jewish, I'm sure they're not doing it at like a temple or something, but a Jew, some sort of Jew-related facility, then that is problematic. But I don't know. And apparently, from what I've been reading, it's also, the students are claiming that they are peacefully protesting, but then there are others who are coming basically off the streets or joining the protest who are, pushing out over that line into, racism and anti-Semitism. And anyway, it's weird, I just, America has always been more pro-Israel than Palestine or any of the other Middle Eastern. We've always had a strong alliance, but now, it seems like a lot of the prevailing sentiment with the young people is pro-Palestinian, and that's just surprising to me. It's not that I have anything against Palestinians, and again, I don't know the situation, but what I do know is that it seems like it kind of comes down to a statute of limitations type thing, right? I mean, who has the claim on this land for so long? They both have claims on the land going back millennia. it was ruled by Israel for years, and then for centuries it was ruled by Islamic people and just the Middle Eastern people. And then in the 1960s, I think it was, post-Holocaust, there was a lot of pro-Jewish sentiment, and they sort of took their homeland back. I don't know, with the war with Egypt and all that. I don't even know all the specifics of that. But anyway, Israel has existed now, as we know it, for, what's that, 60 years? So I don't see it as being occupation. I don't see it as being, I mean, what's the whose land is it? I mean, this is still technically should be Native American land where we live, right? So I don't know. I don't know what the argument is there, but I'd be interested to hear it. I'd be interested to hear someone who has this pro-Palestinian sentiment. But that's not what this podcast is about, and I've gone way off the rails. And so anyway, hey, that'll be my intro for the day. I'm going to take a quick break. We do have some sports stuff to talk about. We're going to talk about the draft is almost here. It's so exciting. A lot of quarterback stuff, a lot of trade stuff going on. We're going to talk about the NBA playoffs, which I lost some money on. We are going to talk about, God forbid, but I feel like there's something that needs to be discussed about the friggin' Dallas Cowboys. So anyway, I'm going to take a quick break, stop here for a second, check my notes, and I'll be right back. All right. Hey, friends, welcome back. So just a quick rundown before I get going again of what I've got on the docket for today. Jayden Daniels talking about, there's some talk about he might not want to go to Washington, and there's some stuff there. Drake May is also, it's starting to feel like he's getting a little bit, just a slight version of the Justin Herbert treatment in the draft coverage and how he's now being viewed. I'm going to go over just my basic draft ideology as well, because it can be simplified pretty well. The basic idea of it. I'm going to give you that. What else? There were some rule changes in college football that are actually pretty important. We're going to talk about the NBA playoffs. We're going to talk about the Braves, and we're going to talk about something about the Dallas Cowboys if we have time. Actually, no, that's something that needs to be talked about really quickly. Apparently there's a current, criminal suit or lawsuit. I think they filed a criminal suit against Dak Prescott for sexual assault, and I didn't know anything about this. It was just kind of started being discussed when I was listening to Pro Football Talk this morning. But apparently this is a thing. And how have I not known this? How has this not been news? This is the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys, and he's got a sexual assault charge, or not, maybe not a criminal charge actually, but there's at least a suit being filed against him. It feels like that's news. It feels like that's something we would have heard about or talked about, but apparently this is something that's at least been going on for a few days, a week. I don't know how long. And I haven't heard anything about it. Why is that? Well, that's weird. But there's also some interesting legal elements to this. Like apparently the statute of limitations had passed, but then Dak and his lawyers actually filed a suit against the accuser and their attorney and her attorneys for extortion. And then that extortion suit basically reopened the door and wiped out the statute of limitations thing. So now, because they filed their suit, now the statute of limitations no longer applies, and that person now filed a suit against Dak for sexual assault. It's a really crazy kind of situation there. But anyway, I don't know how I didn't know about this. Did you guys know about this? Because it seems like that's kind of a big deal. I mean, celebrities, athletes getting accused of things like this, we hear about it. And a lot of them I know are false accusations. A lot of them are not, though. It just feels like this is something we would have heard about, and why haven't we? Also, with the Cowboys, I don't know what the hell they're doing. No one does. They talked about, obviously Jerry said the thing about going all in a couple months ago, and that's clearly not at all what they're doing. If this is his idea of all in, then I don't know what to tell you, because basically what they've done this offseason is they signed one inside linebacker. I think that's literally it. The last time I checked, that was the extent of the moves the Cowboys have made this offseason. They have not re-signed CeeDee Lamb. They have not re-signed Micah Parsons. And they obviously have not re-signed Dak Prescott, who has an almost $60 million cap hit against them this year. So clearly they don't plan on keeping him beyond this year, because if they were going to, they would work this out, or would have worked this out before free agency, to get that cut, to give him an extension and get that cap number down significantly. But clearly they don't plan on keeping him, because they haven't, if nothing else, extend him for 2-3 years, get that cap number. I don't know. I don't know what they're doing with Dak. They don't seem to either. And that brings me to another sort of interesting point and topic that I wanted to get to, and that's all the quarterback talk in the draft, because I've been hearing some real talk about the Cowboys potentially looking quarterback. Look, if things fall that way and there's a guy they love sitting there for them, maybe they should. If they don't plan on keeping Dak beyond this year, which it seems like they don't, then they need to trade him before the deadline. Excuse me. And B, they've got to think about the future. But yeah, that was just something interesting I heard the other day that at first I thought, that's not going to happen. But then the more I thought about it, the more I thought about how they've handled this whole situation with Dak Prescott, it does feel like a very real possibility that the Cowboys, even if they don't do it in the first round, maybe they take a flyer on a Joe Milton or Spencer Rattler or someone. I would not be surprised at all to see the Cowboys in the second or third round take a quarterback. Sorry about that. Doing my stupid little vape thing. I've got to quit that. It's too much money. It can't be good for me, which it's honestly much, much better than smoking. I can personally attest to that. It's much better than smoking when it comes to your health, but it still can't be good for you. And I just need to quit. Plus, I don't want the kids seeing me do it, and I'm setting a bad example for them. Anyway, that's another So going into at the end of last season, and for most of the college football season, it felt like there was Caleb Williams is the number one quarterback, and Drake May is the number two quarterback. And then we'll see how everyone else does and how things shake out. Jaden Daniels, I didn't even think was being considered a top 10 pick. Until, maybe the last couple of weeks of the season, maybe he started getting up there. But, he had an incredible season. He won the Heisman. But even after that, it still didn't feel like, to me, like he was considered to be a top 10 pick. I mean, he made himself clearly a first-round pick, but I didn't think he was one of those top guys. Now, obviously, most mock drafts, including my own, now have him going number 2 to Washington. And these mock drafts, bear in mind, are not what teams should do. They are what I think teams are going to do. Because I think Drake May is still the second best quarterback. But look, here's my basic overall ideology when it comes to the draft. And it really just boils down, because I don't have the resources, I don't have the time, I don't have the expertise, I don't have the connections of all these, legitimate football people, media people. But yet I still end up being right about a lot of things that they are wrong about, and vice versa. I'm not saying that, it's always the case, but I know what I'm talking about. And here's why when it comes to the draft, here is what I go by. What we've seen them do on the football field. That's what matters. I'm not saying the combine's irrelevant. I'm not saying the pro days are irrelevant, although I think they are less relevant even than the combine. I'm not saying that the interviews and the evaluations and all that stuff are meaningless. They have meaning. But to me, especially given the fact that I can't know how these meetings, and I'm not at these pro days and at the combine. For me, and I think it should be this way for most, even the people who do have access to all those things. I think these players should be judged about 80% by what we've seen on the field, what we have seen them do on a football field. And I get it that it's not always going to be, representative. How a guy plays in Conference USA might not determine how he plays in the NFL, or even, in the SEC, things might be different. But when we see them play football, that's what you should judge them by. Not how fast they run in shorts, not not how well they throw the ball in a t-shirt when everything, they've set up their own pro day and everything's exactly the way they want, and they're showing you everything exactly the way they want to show you. No. What matters is what they do on the field. And I get that Drake May, and because this is, we're talking about quarterbacks here. I get that he had a down year last year. But you know what? That's another topic. I'm going to get to that in a second. My overall ideology is 80% of this stuff should be looked at on the field. That's what you're drafting these guys for, is what they're going to be on the football field. Look at what they did on the football field. Judge them by that. Factor in their 40 times, how they did in the cone drills, all that stuff. That can be used to confirm or make you question things. It can, if they hit the 40 time like you expected, that can be used to confirm something. Or if it was lower than you expected, then maybe it can be used to make you sort of question things and reevaluate. But it should not be a big determiner of anything. And it ends up being, what happens is, what everybody thinks at the end of the college football season changes drastically when the draft actually gets here. Now, some of that's legitimate, because the one thing that I do think gives that legitimacy and should be the case is, now a lot of these experts, a lot of these GMs who are busy focusing on other things, the media people, the scout, the front office people, all these people are busy doing other things. But then in the couple of months leading up into the draft, that's when they really start to dig into this stuff. And that's when they really watch tape in more detail, more specifically looking at this guy or that guy, and they really dig into this stuff. So if that's what they are making their judgments on, then I'm good with that. But if these things are being so heavily impacted by prevailing sentiment or combine performance or pro day performance or how he seemed in an interview, any of that shit, I don't think that's nearly, all of that combined is not even close to half as important as what they've done on the football field. So that's why my thinking about these draft prospects doesn't change much from the time the regular season ends to the time the draft happens, because I've watched them. Now, I will be the same as everybody else. I'll see more stuff. I will actually go and look at some things. I'll watch the coverage and listen to the talk about them. So I will learn things. My ideas will, my opinions about guys will change some, but it's based on how they played, how they performed. And that's me. Now, again, if you are actually an NFL coach or GM and you're in these interviews and you're in these evaluations, then you can obviously put more weight into this stuff than I can. But I still don't think all of that combined should be viewed as anything close to as important as what they've done on the field. And we've already seen what they've done on the field. So I guess I'm saying all this to say that for the most part, my opinions about these players are going to be largely the same, without some big change or some new news that's come out about them or something that's happened. My ideas about these guys are going to be largely the same from the time the season ends to the time the draft happens. It will change a little bit, but not nearly as drastically as what we see with the media. And I think that my thinking about it actually sort of reflects more of how NFL front offices feel about it as well. And I've talked about this too. When put yourself in the shoes of one of these, say you're somebody on NFL Live, or you are somebody who writes a column about the draft, or you are somebody on Pro Football Talk, that this is your job. You're spending 40, 50, however many hours a week focusing on this stuff. And the biggest thing from the time the season ends till April is the draft. So you're spending hours and hours and hours for weeks, for months, looking over this stuff. And there's only so much to look at. You know, they're not playing any new games. There's nothing new really happening except the combine, except the pro days. So, of course, if you're spending so much of your time on this, you got to think of new things to say. You got to think of new ways to present things. You've got to make news. You've got to create content. So, you're going to tend to outsmart yourself. You're going to overthink this stuff. And that's what I think happens with a lot of sports media when it comes to draft evaluations. So, anyway, that is my basic overall ideology when it comes to the draft. All of that other shit isn't even close to half as important as what we've already seen them do on the football field. Now, if that's the stuff that you're going back and looking at in more detail, then yes, you justifiably can change your opinions based on that. But if you're changing your opinions just based on prevailing media sentiment or based on, 40 time or whatever, then I don't buy into that quite as much. Anyway, so I'm going to take a quick break. We're going to talk about the draft some more and maybe dive in and hopefully have time to dive into some baseball and basketball stuff. Alrighty, hey friends, back again. Had to stop at the dollar store there for a minute and get myself some Tic Tacs, which was an impulse buy, but I really stopped to get some of these little stack or two energy shots that I know must be terrible for me. Speaking of things that are bad for me, I feel like I was just talking about that. But they're cheap, and they can't be any worse than the Red Bulls and Monsters and whatever that cost 3 times as much. So whatever. Anywho, so here's the thing: all the talk right now is obviously about the quarterbacks at the top of the draft. Prevailing sentiment has obviously Caleb Williams is number one. We know that. We can just forget about that. But so then the conversation really begins at 2. Now, it seems like for most of the media, that's already settled as well. And the majority of them have Jaden Daniels as the number 2 quarterback, and they have him going number 2 to Washington. Now, apparently, Jaden Daniels himself isn't crazy about that. He's said some things about maybe he's talked about, which, he's been kind of prodded into this stuff, I think, and they've kind of asked these leading questions to make him say this kind of stuff. But they were asking him about, playing, how it'd be to play for Antonio Pierce. Who was actually, I think, his high school coach and was his college coach, actually, when he was at Arizona State. So they've got a long history together. And so, of course, he said he would love that and, talked was very excited about that possibility. And he's also apparently said things that have made people think he would like to play for the Vikings, but I don't know the specifics of what he said about it. I heard that Raiders soundbite, but that's the only one I've heard. But apparently he's said things that make people think he might not want to go to Washington, or at least that there are multiple places he would much rather go. Now, it's not up to him. If he's drafted number 2, he's going to be in Washington, and they'll be fine. But that started a lot of talk about, could the Raiders make this happen? And the answer is no. The answer is absolutely not. They cannot make it happen. And the reason I'm talking about this is because this is something that was being discussed on the radio this morning when I was listening to, I think it was Pro Football Talk, either Pro Football Talk or Unsportsmanlike on ESPN. And they were talking about, is there any way that the Raiders could make this happen? And the answer is just no. They could not. Unless Arizona has just played everyone and they really don't like anybody, any of the top few quarterbacks, maybe they really like Michael Penix, that's the only way that could happen. And obviously that's not the case. But that's the only possibility because, you want to compare it to trades that have happened before. Most recently, the Bears. got that boatload of trades, and it was a similar. I think they were actually, the Panthers might have been 13th as well, like the Raiders are right now. So you would think, would that take a comparable draft package to get up? Would the Raiders have to give up, multiple picks and first round picks and Devontae Adams and whatever else? Um, but the difference is, at that point, the Bears were in a situation where they thought they had their quarterback. They still were hoping Justin Fields was going to develop. So they weren't looking for a quarterback. The Commanders are. The Commanders traded away their starting quarterback last year. I don't even know who they have on the roster this year. They are not in that same position that the Bears are. So they are a team who needs a quarterback, and that's the big difference. That's why you can't really compare these trade packages between, like, a team who like the Titans, when we traded back years ago with the Rams for them to get Jared Goff. At that point, I think was it Mariota who we had, or something? We thought we had Mariota, Jake Locker, somebody who we thought was our quarterback. So we trade back with the Rams. Now, we racked up on that and got a boatload of picks from them, and it was an awesome trade for us. But we were willing to do that because we didn't need a quarterback. A team who needs a quarterback, it's not going to happen. You're not going to get them to move out of that spot. I mean, you could offer them, it would take an unprecedented, and that's what now the New England Patriots are actually, their wording, they were asking for an unprecedented haul to trade back from 3. And it would take that to get a team like Washington out of that spot. And I just don't know that there's anything that the Raiders could or should be willing to give up that's going to be enough to make it worth it for Washington. So Washington's going to stay where they are, as they should. The only way they trade back, I think, would be maybe if the Patriots wanted to move up a spot. But I don't see them trading back really at all. There's no reason for them to. Take your pick of whichever of these guys you like best, whether it's Daniels, whether it's May, whether it's McCarthy. Take your pick and be happy. Don't outsmart yourself, and I don't think they're going to. So, I kind of feel the same way about the Patriots, and that's why I've been saying all along that I don't think all this talk we keep hearing about the Patriots, that's when the draft starts. That, I keep hearing media people say this because they think it's pretty much now solidified that Williams is 1 and Daniels is 2, and then the draft is going to get interesting at 3. I don't know about that. The only way that happens, because it's the exact same scenario. They traded away their starting quarterback from last year. They don't have anybody. That's what they need. That's their biggest, most obvious glaring hole is quarterback. So unless, let's say they love Drake May, but they're so-so on Jaden Daniels, and then Washington actually takes May, well, then the Patriots might be willing to trade back with someone, and that would be an ideal situation for somebody like the Vikings. Or let's say the Patriots really love Drake May, and so then the Commanders take Daniels as they are expected. Well, then the Patriots are not going to trade back. They're going to take that guy. They're going to take their quarterback, the most important position in the sport, the most important position in all of major sports. There's nothing to even compare it to in the other sports. So I think unless the Patriots just really aren't crazy about whichever guy is left, whether it's May or Daniels or McCarthy, whatever, unless they're just not really crazy about that guy, I don't see why they would trade back. So then you get to 4. That's where a trade is possible. I think that's where it really begins. I think that if I'm Arizona and Minnesota comes to me with the offer that it seemed, that it's probably going to take, like a big, massive offer, which I heard it mentioned that the offer might have to include Justin Jefferson. I don't think that should be on the table. But there's a whole other thing to that, which, he's coming, he needs a new contract. He's coming into the final year of his rookie deal, and he's expecting to be the highest paid receiver in football, as he should, but he's expecting a number over $30 million a year. And the Vikings have been clearly a little hesitant to give him that deal. So I don't know, if they're thinking they're not going to re-sign him, then that could be a piece that you include. I think that would be absurd, to trade him. I think they should just go ahead and get a deal done with him, but whatever. Um, but it's going to take a lot, no matter what, especially if it's, 3 or 4. So if that happens, maybe the Cardinals would be better off letting that happen. Now you've got the Vikings sitting there at number 5, and they get probably the best player in the draft, and Marvin Harrison Jr. I think they'd be thrilled. I think no matter what happens, the Chargers are in a great position because right now in my mock draft, and Mel Kiper has the exact same thing. It was funny. I did mine first. I want to make that clear. And then I saw Mel Kiper's mock draft come out a couple of days later, and in the top 10, his top 10 looked almost exactly the same as mine, including the mock trade there at 5, which, it's not like it was anything too original. A lot of people have this, and this is sort of the prevailing, thinking of how things are going to go. But it was just cool that this is how I did it. And then he comes out a couple days later and it's almost the exact same. But anyway, I think the Cardinals are probably going to stay put there and take Marvin Harrison Jr., who I believe is the best player in this draft. And then they're at 5. That's where I think Minnesota could really be targeting. And I think Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers brass would be open for business, and they would be very happy to move back. Malik Neighbors is a great prospect. They're going to, Brock Bowers, any of the offensive tackles are there, any of the edge rushers are there. So, you'd have your pick of great players, but you have a lot of spots you need right now. You have a lot of holes to fill. You're trying to rebuild now, sort of with a new coach. I think they would be thrilled to take 2 first-round picks from the Vikings, move back 6 spots, and also have number 23 and get their first-round pick next year and probably their second-round pick next year. I think the Chargers would be great with that. I think Arizona would also be good with it too, but that would mean passing on potentially a generational talent in Marvin Harrison. Now, I think the analytical people seems like almost always in favor of trading back and acquiring more picks. So they would probably say that even if Harrison is still there at 4, you trade back. I don't know that that's the case. But I think Arizona's in a good position either way as well. I think they are maybe in the best position of anybody in this draft, because they're going to have the option of taking a generational receiver or any player they want, any non-quarterback they want, because quarterbacks are likely to go 1, 2, 3. They can have their pick of any player they want, or they can get a boatload, a huge haul of picks and maybe a player in a trade. So, I think Arizona's sitting in the best position possible. And then right after them, if they take Harrison, I think then the Chargers are going to be in a great spot. And I think they probably would be more willing to trade back than most others. So, anyway, let's see if I can stop or something for a second. Maybe look at my notes or just remember what I was going to talk about. Oh, yeah. So anyway, I don't even know what I was getting at with any of that. I guess I was just going through the possible trade scenarios. But it does feel like now at this point, the thinking seems to be it's Williams number 1, Daniels number 2, and then I think there's some debate of who's after that. For me personally, I've still got Williams number 1 and Drake May number 2, and then I think Jaden Daniels would be number 3 because I see him. I know a lot of people see him and see like a Lamar Jackson, but maybe a better passer. I see Robert Griffin III. Now, RG3 was great until he had all those injuries, but Daniels has that same body type. He has that same running and playing style. And if he's going to have to be sure to take care of himself. And I don't know. That would just kind of worry me. But I'm not saying that I'm not saying I don't believe in Jaden Daniels. I think with everything I've said lately, it could seem like I'm a Daniels hater. I'm not. I just am not nearly as sold on him as it seems like the bulk of the mainstream media are. I think it's close between him and May. I'm not saying that there's a big gap. I think, that either one, and again, this is a crapshoot. We don't know with any of these guys, but I'm starting to become even more of a Drake May fan for the same reason that I was becoming more of a Justin Herbert fan during his draft. Because I remember, and I've talked about this before, how everybody just tore him to pieces when he said something about he was a little bit of an introvert. That people lost their fucking minds about that. Like, it was the most, like, he had just said, like, he likes to kill puppies or something. Like, people were going nuts when he said that. How can this guy lead a team? How can he lead a huddle? How can he be an NFL quarterback if he's an intro? I mean, and then it got into some people, mainstream media people, were saying things about him that were just really kind of over the line, like cruel stuff about him. Like, they just started tearing him to shreds after that. Now, that's not happened with Drake May. It has not nearly been to that level. But we have started to hear some similar things about how, I heard him talking about it this morning. Mike Florio was saying that Drake May seemed a little nervous during their interview with him, and that makes him worry about, if he's nervous in the interview, is he going to be able to be a big game quarterback? And it's like, what? That's two totally different things. And they were also talking about, a person could be nervous in a big time media interview in a draft that's going to determine their life. But when you put him on a football field, that's what he does. He's not going to be, it's a totally different situation. And what else? And they were talking about, too, another thing with him was Chris Sims was saying that he does not believe that a quarterback who is considered to be a top tier quarterback should have a worse year, his final year, than he did the year before in college. But we've seen that happen before. We saw it with Will Levis, and I know he's not, for sure yet, but he's getting there, and I think he's going to be for sure by the end of next year. We've seen it happen we saw it happen with Caleb Williams this year. I mean, it happens. Guys might have a great sophomore or junior year, and then for some reason, maybe their stats go down a little bit. That's exactly what happened with Drake May. He lost a lot of talent around him. He lost a lot of receivers, a lot of skill position guys, and offensive line, and they lost a lot of talent from year before last to last year. And so his numbers went down, and he did not look as good as he had the year prior. That happens. I don't see that as being such a big deal. But anyway, I just feel like I've now turned into the Drake May defender, and maybe I should ease off on it a little bit because I'm not 100% about him. I'm not sure. It's just I do think that he's the second best quarterback in this draft. He reminds me a lot of Justin Herbert, and I like him. I think he's going to be good. I'm not sure. I'd probably give him, if we're doing, and I meant to do this. I forgot I was going to try to go through and give some of these guys like the Derek Persley draft grades. But if I was giving Drake May a grade, I would probably give him like a 7.9 or something. And I would give Caleb Williams maybe, I don't know, an 8.4. And Jaden Daniels, 7.6. So they're all pretty close there. And I would give Marvin Harrison a 9.2 or something. And I would give Brock Bowers a 9.1. And I would give Joe Alt an 8.4, 8.5 maybe. I don't know. I'm just making this up, obviously, but this is just kind of where I'm seeing these guys. So, I'm not saying I'm totally sold on May, but I'm just saying it feels like at this point I'm having to defend him because everybody is sort of starting to not only prop up Jaden Daniels, but tear down Drake May to the point to where now it seems like even J.J. McCarthy may have passed him in a lot of people's, at least in a lot of the media's mind. So, anyway, I don't even remember what I was going to talk about with that. I think I was just going to talk about Drake May and how he reminds me of Justin Herbert, and it's kind of a similar situation now with how he's being viewed as what happened with Herbert. And I had said in that draft, I said most years Justin Herbert would be a number one overall pick. It just happens to be this year he's in the same draft as two guys who are like no-brainer number one overall picks, which were Joe Burrow and Tua. But I was always a big Justin Herbert fan, and I was a bigger Justin Herbert fan than I am Drake May. But I do think Drake May has a little bit more potential and seems more likely to be a good pro than Jaden Daniels. But it's close. I just, yeah, I feel like I've spent way too much time talking about him now, and I'm going, from, championing him to now backing off of that. But that's my point. Is like I like him. I'm not crazy about him, but I would say he's probably, in the mid to high sevens. Excuse me. So anyway, I'm going to take a break from that. We've got some basketball stuff to talk about, maybe a little baseball stuff, and I'll be right back. All right, friends. So I don't know where I just ended because we had a problem, technical difficulties for some reason. I just recorded the final 2 segments of the show, and there's no audio. You can't hear me. I don't know why. I don't know why. But anyway, I'm just going to run through everything that I talked about really quickly. If I can remember everything, it was the Braves look like the best team in baseball. You guys know I'm not a huge baseball fan, but it's much more interesting than it used to be now with the rule changes. And the Braves are one of, if not the most exciting team to watch. I've watched only a handful of games, but I know we lost to the Rangers last night, but I think we were going to sweep them if they didn't win that one. And yeah, the Braves just look incredible, and it's fun to watch, and maybe that'll maintain some interest in baseball for me. College football made some new rule changes that I really like. Number one, they changed where there's now going to be a 2-minute warning at the end of the half and end of the fourth quarter. That's pretty cool, but more importantly, now helmet communications are finally going to be allowed. This is something they should have done years ago, could have prevented all this sign stealing bullshit. But now coaches can speak directly to one player on the field, which obviously is going to be the quarterback on offense and probably a linebacker on defense. And now call the plays directly into the helmet, just like they do in the NFL. I love that. I hope that Tennessee adopts it. It's not going to be a requirement, but it is going to be now allowed for all Division I schools. God, I didn't even talk about any of the NBA stuff, did I? You guys didn't get to hear any of my NBA analysis. Good Lord. I know you're probably going to, what are you going to do without that, right? I mean, how could you live without my detailed NBA analysis? I don't know. Let me pull over for a second, just really quickly. First of all, I lost every bet that I've made so far, which I've only made 3 small bets, but I bet on both the underdogs in the play-in games, the final play-in games, because both teams are without their best players. The Pelicans were without Zion. The Heat were without Jimmy Butler, but I should have learned my lesson a long time ago about ever betting against Miami. And I also lost, I bet for the Suns to win game 1 against the Timberwolves. The Timberwolves are for real, as it turns out. And I've only watched a handful of regular season games this year. This is going to be one of the years where I don't really start paying attention until the playoffs. So now I am paying attention. One of the series that I think most people were most excited about was the Clippers and Mavericks, and that was just a blowout. I don't think the Mavs ever were even close. So I hope that changes because, well, I'm for the Mavericks in that one, but, really that's just an exciting series with 2 teams that it feels like are legit contenders. And the Suns, man, I mentioned that one briefly. If they get knocked out in the first round, and I know it's only game 1, but if they don't get past this good Timberwolves team in the first round, it's going to be a huge, massively disappointing year for them. And there will probably be some changes coming in Phoenix, including Kevin Durant might be out of there. Excuse me, but we'll see. I still imagine that they will win that series, but the T-Wolves are for real. Don't want to overreact to game 1, but yeah. My Lakers gave Denver some real trouble there for the first half, but then the Nuggets started pulling away in the second half. It was game 1, it was on the road, but it does give you some hope if you're a Lakers fan that maybe we really can give them a run for it this year. And in the East, the Celtics dominated the Heat. The Bucks looked really good again. The Knicks down to the 76ers, which I had the Sixers winning that series, but that's going to be an interesting one. But really, it's Boston in the East. If they don't make it to the finals, that's going to be a huge disappointment. I don't think it's necessarily championship or bust, but I do think it's finals or bust for Boston. And the one team that I think it looks like can give them some trouble does look like Milwaukee. Maybe they've figured things out. They looked really good against Indiana. And if they have figured things out, they are the team that could give Boston a run. And then, as it's been for the last 15 years or more, the West, though, is where really the best teams are. I mean, you've got in the East 2 teams that really have a legit shot, with one being a clear favorite. In the West, you've got the Clippers, the Mavericks could win, the Suns could win, the Nuggets or Lakers could win. I mean, that's 5 teams that I think everybody would give a legit shot as being a real contender, championship contender this year. And I know I didn't include the Timberwolves. I mean, even though I haven't watched much of them, if that's who they are, what they did against Phoenix the other night, they could do it as well too. I know I didn't include Oklahoma City, who is the number 1 overall seed, but I just don't think they are there yet. I like them. I really like them as a team. I like what they're doing. I like the way they're building it. It's fun. It's exciting. It's young. And I think they are coming, but I think they're still a year away from being like a real championship finals contender. I think in the second round, I do think they'll get past the Pelicans, but I think they're in the second round, they're going to have to face either the Clippers or the Mavericks. And coming up against one of those, seasoned, veteran, real contending teams, I think that will give them problems. Anyway, so that was my NBA analysis. Did I mention the Braves? I don't know. The Braves look like the best team in baseball. I already said that in one segment, but you couldn't hear it. I don't know if I've said it again in this segment, but they're fun to watch. Baseball is more interesting than ever now that they've made some rule changes, and the Braves are really, really fun to watch. And if you're a Braves fan, then yeah, it's pretty cool. Anyway, so I hope everyone has a great Monday. I hope you have a great week. I am off work tomorrow. Sissy has her little dance recital, and I'm so excited about that. So I took the day off to make sure I could get her there on time, and not risk missing anything. And also Lydia's out of town, so I've got to be the one to make sure everybody's ready and there on time. And yeah, but that's super exciting. I'm also off Wednesday, which is my scheduled day off. So you guys will probably see some YouTube stuff from me here over the coming days. Check out the YouTube channel. It's Talking Sports at Work on YouTube. If you're listening to this on the podcast, if you're listening to this on YouTube, check out the podcast. It's Talking Sports at Work wherever you get your podcasts. I am at HDW Pursley on all that social media stuff. So follow me, like it, subscribe, share it, do whatever. All that crazy, good, fun stuff. I hope everyone has a wonderful week, and I'll talk to you again soon. Love you. Bye.